Well, what do we have here? Isn't this exciting? Excel 2013. First thing you'll see when you open it up, this preview, is a start page where you can start with a blank workbook or take the tour, which I'll quickly walk you through the tour just in case you don't have the ability to install it on your computer. And you'll see there's also all sorts of other templates that they've preloaded it with, like Oscar ballot predictor, home loan comparison. If you scroll down, there's a generic family budget. So you can play around with many of these templates to see what Microsoft thinks is worthwhile looking at. But for now, we'll take the tour. So I'll go ahead and click Take Tour. And before we jump into the tour, let's take a look at what's different. First of all, the general layout and design looks a bit different. You'll see my custom group automatically came over with it. They switched to a more clean looking interface, a lot more green color, which is fine by me because I'm a big fan of green. Most of the tabs are the same with additional functionality, of course. The file menu has changed quite a bit. You'll see it has options for recent workbooks, SkyDrive, computer, add a place. It seems like they've tried to improve on the interface and the navigation, and they're pushing the SkyDrive, which is related to storing your Excel documents using cloud storage, so storing it somewhere that's accessible from any computer that you're on because it's stored on a server rather than on your computer. And they also allow for some really cool options for embedding Excel spreadsheets into websites. But we'll go back to the tour and follow this through real quick. Click here, and Flash Fill is the first piece of functionality that they show you. Here it has a list of email addresses, and it'll tell you to start typing the first name. And the way that Flash Fill works is once it understands what you're trying to do, it will automatically suggest what it thinks the rest of the data should look like. So, as it says in the instructions to the right, we'll type in Nancy and first name, and then we will type Andrew, and you'll see that as I'm typing Andrew, this Flash Fill list comes down below, which shows me that it recognizes that I'm taking the first name out of each of these, and if I just hit enter, you'll see that it automatically filled in those first names for me because it knew I was taking everything to the left of the first period. Flash Fill seems like it'll be a really cool way of parsing out data without actually having to know some of the formulas that would require you to get that, or without using any sort of text to columns. So that's Flash Fill, and I will hit next. This next feature called Quick Analysis is actually very exciting. So first, what you'll do is select the table that you want to analyze, and you'll see in the bottom right there's this Quick Analysis button. If you click on that, this menu area will pop open where it has different categories of things you'd like to do. So formatting, for example, if you just hover over each of the examples, you'll see that it'll show you in real time what would happen if you chose any of these recommended formattings. You can obviously go through and do the normal formatting, but it does give you some quick analysis options. There's also charts, so depending on what the information is, it'll give you different charts that it might suggest you trying out. You can tweak these after the fact, but it at least gives you a good place to start. Totals really have to do with the bottom of the table. You'll see there's a sum, average, count, and these are for adding an additional row to the bottom of your table with totals. The tables tab is very interesting. The first one would be just making it a table, which I believe it already is, but then it offers you some pivot tables that it suggests based on what your data is. So very quickly you can have the Q1 sales by industry type just by clicking this pivot table, which eases the process of making them rather than trying to do it from scratch. And you'll also see sparklines are here, which I've gone over in my chart video, but show to the right the different trends for each specific row. And so with the quick analysis, you can very quickly take some data that you have and turn it into useful information with just the click of a few buttons. And I'll go to next. And the last piece of functionality that they show you is the recommended charts. So if I select this table here, Instead of using the quick analysis, I'm going to go to the Insert tab, and I'm going to go to Recommended Charts. And you'll see a window will pop up which has a listing of recommended charts as well as all charts to choose from, but it'll show you a few different types of chart that might work with your data. I kind of like this one, which shows Q1 sales and Q2 sales together so that each bar represents the total. And so I'll hit OK. And then you'll see something that's usually not there when you have a chart, which is these three buttons to the top right. Now the first one is all about the chart elements. So the axes, and as you highlight these, you'll see there's live updates to the chart just to show you what it would look like if you did include or didn't include some of the items. So if I highlight axis titles, you'll see that it puts a title on each side. When I go to data labels, it'll show me the dollar amounts related to each bar. Data table underneath it. A lot of this won't show up cleanly in the preview because you'll need to resize and move elements around, but it'll at least show you relatively quickly what each will look like. In addition, there's also this style brush button. You can choose different styles of charts, so you'll see as I hover over them, it'll show me what each one looks like without actually changing it, and then if I click on it, it will choose that type. So I chose the fourth one down, I think. And there's also a color tab here, and you can pick different colors depending on how much you want to see. But again, as you hover over, it gives you a live preview of the information. And if we had more than two colors, this might look a little more interesting. And there's also this chart filters button, which will allow you to filter out certain items. So if we only wanted to see Q1 sales, which you see it highlights as I hover over it, or Q2 sales, or get rid of any one of these specific categories, you could do that all very quickly through this filter menu. So I'll filter off Q2 sales and hit apply, and you'll see that it only shows me Q1 sales now. This will make charting a lot more simple for many people who find charts in Excel to be very difficult to use. And so play around with these features and see how quickly you can get some very interesting and dynamic looking charts relatively quickly using these new features. And lastly, you can click some of these links on their tour sheet to look at the Getting Started Center or the Excel Team blog, and there's some information down bottom about the program. And now I'll switch over to a workbook I made to show you some of the other features in Excel 2013. Feel free to download this file that I posted to follow along. One of my favorite new parts of a new version of Excel is functions. You get a whole lot more functions. Down bottom, I have a listing of all the functions that are new to Excel 2013. And you can click the link there to follow it to Microsoft's page where you can learn about each one of these. But I figured I'd go through some of the more interesting ones that I found up above in this table. So first one we have here is the days formula. I have two different dates. Using the days formula, I put the end date first, which is highlighted in blue. And in 2013 you can see they've done a lot more to emphasize the cell colorings when you're in a formula. And the start date, which would be 1/1/2013. And so when I hit enter, you'll see 45 days in between those dates. To the right of it, I've used another new formula called FORMULATEXT. You'll see all this one does is say what is the formula text of cell E3, and then it displays the text there for me. One interesting usage of this formula text function is if we copied it and pasted the values, which is just the formula, if you go in and hit enter, it'll do that formula again. So if you want to copy a formula without changing any of the references, that could be an interesting way of doing it. Or just seeing whether or not you have a formula or a value in a certain cell. Next one is ENCODEURL. So here you can see what the formula text is in cell E4, which is I'm doing a hyperlink and I'm using the ENCODEURL formula to take bits of text as well as text from other cells and combine them all together to create a web URL reference. And previously you wouldn't be able to combine things like this. So in this instance, I'm taking http:// in quotes, and I'm adding Excel and exposure, and then in quotes .com, and you'll see I wrote Excel exposure as the website friendly link. Now if I followed that, it would take me to my website. But if I changed this data, so if I wrote GOO and GLE, and I click on it this time, it should take me to Google. So that could be very useful if you have hyperlinks that you need to put into Excel based on other cells. This ENCODEURL formula could be very useful for that. Formula text I already explained a bit. One thing is if there is no formula, so instead if this didn't say equals C5, but I just typed in 45 and hit enter, you'll see that it comes up with an NA. So it needs to be a formula in order to return anything. And that brings me to the next formula, which is IFNA. And you'll notice that when I have this as a formula, my FORMULATEXT function works fine, and my IFNA is checking to see if cell F5 is NA, then it will put problem in. Otherwise it will just display F5, which is similar to the if error, but it's only related to NAs. So right now it shows what's in F5, which is the formula text. When I change this though to just be 45 typed in, that turns to NA, and then you see my if NA cell results in problem because it is actually an NA. And now the ISFORMULA function, which is pretty self-explanatory, it will check a cell reference and see whether or not it has a formula in it. So in C7 I have 21 directly entered into the cell. In D7 I have a formula which refers to cell C7. So although they both show 21, this ISFORMULA will say that C7 is false because it's not a formula. But if I move this over, hit enter, it will say true for D7 since there is a formula there. ISOWEEKNUM is a specific dating type that groups dates into specific weeks of the calendar, so you can see which number week a certain date is in. So 1/1/2013 would be in the first week. If I move that over to D8, which has 2/15/2013, you'll see this as week 7. Number value is an interesting formula because it'll allow you to take a text string that has certain delimiters that let you know where a period or a comma is. So you can tell Excel what character or symbol represents a comma or a period, and it will change it to that number value. So here we have formula, take C9, then for the decimal separator, that will be the slash, so slashes will refer to decimals, and the group separator, which would be the commas, is an open bracket, and so it converts that to 400,330.443. If I move it over 1, you'll see that it converts that to the amount in millions. So if you have some data that is formatted strangely, you can use this to pick out the numbers if there's a certain method to how it's stored. Finally, the sheet and sheets function. Sheet will look at a reference and tell you which sheet number the reference refers to, and sheets will tell you the number of sheets in a reference. So you'll see that the sheet function for pivot E7, so on the pivot sheet, shows that it's sheet number 2, and the sheets function for between pivot and ref shows that there are 3 sheets in this reference. You'll see that when I move the pivot sheet over 1, it now tells me that it is sheet number 3, and the sheets between pivot and ref are now 2. So those are what I thought were the most important new functions that were released. So I hope you enjoyed this look into Excel 2013. I've got some great data setup and pivot table, so you can try out the new Excel data model and multi-table pivot table functionality that Excel 2013 also introduced. So why don't you try and go ahead, download the Excel 2013 preview and give it a free try. It also includes the other 2013 components of Office, so I'd recommend checking it out. Thanks.